From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lead. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on May 9th, 2025 from South Carolina Public Radio Studios here in Columbia. You can buy the Pope's childhood home for $199,000. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you for pushing alert that. On this episode of The Lead, we have made it. We are on the other side of sine die for the 2025 legislative session, and we have a lot to talk about. That's why we have some of the best State House reporters on this episode with me, and we'll get to all that in just a moment, talking about what moved this year, what's in limbo till next year, and what is left to do, the budget. Now, before we get to that, folks, I want to ask you about you sharing your stories about Mother Emanuel and the tragedy that happened there 10 years ago when we lost 9 beautiful souls. That's why South Carolina ETV has created Voices Collected. It's your voice, your memory, and your experience. It matters. Visit scetv.org/Emanuel9 and help us honor the past while building a stronger, more connected South Carolina. You can go there, you can fill out a form on that website, and you can let us know that you want to share your story. We will record you, and we will put it on this podcast and possibly a future television episode. So let us know at scetv.org/Emanuel9. But to this episode, we love hearing from our listeners. In fact, we have one in the wind down section, I'm told. A friend, a true friend of this pod. So looking forward to that. But you can share your voice for this podcast and let us know some of your hot takes, what you guys think about our hot takes at 803-563-7169. There are no wrong answers, but please bring a positive attitude in these trying times. 803-563-7169. Welcome, folks, to Life Post-Session. That's right, there is still life here. We have survived the first year of the 126th South Carolina General Assembly. Give yourself a round of applause. Okay, too much. Okay. Now, this episode we're talking about tort reform, taxes, education, distracted driving, and so much more that's going to affect you. In order to do that, I have assembled an all-star cast. No, it's not just me and AT talking, folks.
Why?
In fact, I have some of the best State House reporters on this episode, including the Associated Press's Jeffrey Collins, WIS-TV's Mary Green, South Carolina Public Radio's Mayan Schechter, and the state newspaper's Joe Bustos. We all gathered around the round table on This Week in South Carolina to talk about these big issues, and I started off by asking Jeffrey about tort reform. You guys know it, we know it, the biggest, sexiest topic of the year, but it was a very long debate this year, but they actually got tort reform passed, and will have some major implications for bars and restaurants going forward. And so I asked Jeffrey about this bill and what it means.
If money equals sexy, then it was by far the sexiest topic at the State House. There's a lot of money poured into that sucker this year. But so what they did is, we started the session with grand plans, at least among some people, to do a massive overhaul of the civil lawsuit system in South Carolina. What we ended up getting is we got a pretty substantial change in what's called liquor liability. And that's, restaurants and bars that serve alcohol after 5 p.m. have to have $1 million worth of insurance. And, since that law's been put in place several years ago, insurance rates have skyrocketed. Restaurants and bars are having to close. So the deal that got struck is that you still have to have the $1 million, but you can cut that floor by doing things like having alcohol server training, scanners for IDs, if you close before midnight, if you only serve, if 40% or less of your sales are in alcohol. So that will, hopefully the supporters say that will reduce the insurance rates, and that was the big cry out. Now, it did also make some changes in the way that lawsuit settlements and judgments are paid out. So judgments especially. In South Carolina, there's a system where if you're in any way responsible, even in the smallest amount, you could be responsible for the entire award if not everybody can pay. So if you sue like a restaurant, but then you sue an individual who declares bankruptcy or another out of bankrupt business, in the end, you could be responsible for the entire amount, even if a jury says you're only 1%, 2%, 3% responsible. They've shifted that back so I have no law degree. I only watched LA Law, but they did shift it back to where you aren't going to be on the hook for the whole bill if you do have only a small amount of responsibility.
Kind of like a bar that serves, someone who's been drinking and driving goes to different bars, have different drinks, and they all get dinged with the same amount versus one that really probably overserved the person in the first place.
Exactly, right. And, they didn't get everything they wanted. Mm-hmm. Medical malpractice is still out there, to reform those rules and some other lawsuit rules. But the House says it's done. They said they're fine. They feel like they handled tort reform. The Senate's not so sure, so we'll be back talking about this again next May.
Well, and that's interesting, too, because we did see the House come out swinging with just that aspect of liquor liability. They passed that unanimously to really help bring relief to those bar and restaurant owners early on and pressured the Senate, and then we actually got a compromise, so that was something to see.
They managed to compromise after, the Senate spent several weeks on this. It was by far the dominant feature of their session.
So, Maayan, let's go from a big bill to the biggest bill, the budget bill, the $14 billion bill, which is still being debated right now. It's going to be a conference committee with House and Senate lawmakers. We got rid of crossover day this year. Sad to see it go. It's kind of an arbitrary deadline the month before the end of session. And they also got rid of conference committees after sine die, the last day of session, so folks aren't drawing out this session. Because sometimes bills get pushed and they say, well, we can do it afterwards in a conference committee. But one bill, like we're saying, is the budget. So talk to us about what's in the budget, what folks are looking to do with it. And I know there's some additional money that should be coming as well.
Yeah, I can't tell if I miss or love the fact that we got rid of the crossover deadline. There were parts of it that I definitely would have appreciated perhaps this week. But right, so the budget is really the last thing. And in large part because the Board of Economic Advisors, the budget forecasters or revenue forecasters for the state, won't meet until May 20th. And that's when they release new revenue projections. And obviously that's important when you're putting together a budget that takes effect July 1. So they'll be back May 20th, and then the legislature is expected to come back the week of May 28th. So just some of the similarities between the House and the Senate, and these are obviously kind of the big headlines. Teacher pay, both agreed to raise starting pay to $48,500. Joe, you reported this week a little bit about the health insurance premiums for state employees. They'll cover that. School resource officers, this became a big deal. The governor has been really pushing this, and he got very active on social media over the last several months about trying to get more money in the budget. The House initially put substantially less, and part of that was because they were still figuring out these school districts that were paying for these SROs on their own so that the state wasn't necessarily providing the entire cost amount. But in the end, it sounds like the House and the Senate have come to an agreement over that. And they've also agreed already, and this is locked in, the Capital Reserve Fund, which pays for big capital projects. That is on the governor's desk, and he should be signing that any day. And that pays for capital projects like the USC Neurological Hospital. That's a big deal. There are definitely some disagreements. And if you look at the spending plan, I mean, this is really granular, but when you look at the state spending plan, you can see ones everywhere. And that, of course, that was explained the other day, but that just means that it's kind of a holding place to say, here are the areas where we definitely need to kind of negotiate how much we want to spend, and that includes tuition mitigation, which lawmakers have been, over the past several years, really big on putting more money toward colleges and universities to keep in-state tuition low. Provisos, those little pesky little one-year budget attachments we all love to cover. Money for bridges, DOT, House put in more than the Senate did. Disaster relief is another one, and debt service. I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest pots that we're going to see a lot of activity and a lot of conversation over.
Yeah, and they have had strong revenues coming in, and we expect to see more too, like you said, on May 20th. But a strong year compared to, questionable economic outlooks going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has said we're not in that kind of pandemic era where we were just seeing a flood of money come in from the federal government. So we are probably plateauing a little bit more. But of course, a lot of lawmakers will talk about the fact that the budget is growing. But of course, I think it's important to mention that the state of South Carolina is also growing alongside that.
Yeah, you can see that on the roads you're talking about. But really quickly, Maayan, before I go to Mary, no earmarks.
No earmarks.
Pork.
Community investments, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that was sort of a last-minute surprise that was really publicized first by the Senate Budget Chair, Senate Finance Committee Chairman Harvey Peeler. And then, of course, we saw that joint letter between him and Bruce Bannister, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. I think there is a bipartisan frustration, at least that we heard on the House floor this week, from lawmakers who are upset because, of course, a lot of this money, yes, there are projects that these dollars would go toward that were probably a bit questionable. You weren't really sure if it was actually performing the duties in which it said, but a lot of the money was going to law enforcement, to road projects. Senate Minority Leader Brad Hutto was telling reporters the other day, a homeless shelter. So there's a lot of frustration, particularly from lawmakers who represent poor, low-income rural areas where that money was super important because they just don't have the tax base to keep up with it.
And then also when we talk about funding, which we'll talk about federal funding in a minute, like we don't exactly know how that could affect these programs and initiatives at the local level too. So Mary, you want to talk about the major education bill that we saw pass? There's a lot of big education bills that happened this year. We talked to House Education Committee Chairwoman Shannon Erickson about a lot of this too, but tell us about that final bill, what happened with the vouchers, or should I say Education Scholarship Trust Fund, and what that means for students in the state.
Well, the name really depends on who you ask, because that is, like you said, the proper name is the Education Scholarship Trust Fund program. It's what a lot of folks refer to as the private school voucher program. So this is a program that last September, the state Supreme Court struck down. It essentially would give certain families below certain income thresholds state dollars, public dollars that they could use on a variety of expenses, but the big intention is so they could afford private school tuition. State Supreme Court says, no, this violates the state constitution's ban on public dollars directly benefiting private and religious schools. They didn't strike down the entire program, but they struck down that provision, which really, again, was the key element, the reason for the program. So a major priority of Republicans coming into the session is figuring out a way to get around that ruling and reinstitute this program, and specifically that allowance on private school tuition. So there are a few different ideas floated around throughout the session. The Senate first, was up to bat, and they passed a bill that would have funded it through lottery revenues. It went over to the House. The House said, no, we're not going to do that. We think that's maybe not the best way. So ultimately, they compromised. The funding mechanism is what the House had put into its version of the bill, which is saying there is no funding mechanism that is specifically outlined in the bill. Every year, it's going to be up to the General Assembly to decide how to pay for it. Right now, to Maayan's point, still working out the budget, and the House and Senate have different funding mechanisms included in the budget for how they'll go about it. But it does definitely leave the door open to the possibility that once again we will see a voucher program that is funded with money from the general fund, i.e. taxpayer dollars, which is what the state Supreme Court just struck down several months ago. So the governor signed that into law just earlier this week on Tuesday, the final week of the session. They did include another significant change, depending on how you look at it, that they think will work around the ruling last year. And they instituted this new position that they're calling the trustee. It's a person outside of state government who would be appointed by the state superintendent of education to essentially manage the funding. House Education and Public Works Committee Chair Shannon Erickson essentially came up with it and said, this is something that Chief Justice John Kittredge referenced in his dissenting opinion on that ruling that they think addresses the constitutionality question. We are waiting. Inevitably, this will be hit with another lawsuit, see where this goes, and will in all likelihood be back before the state Supreme Court figuring out, is this constitutional?
So we'll see if it even goes into effect at the beginning of next school year, if it even works out.
That's the goal of it.
Yeah. Joe, we had a historic moment this year during session in the Senate where senators voted 33-8 to remove State Treasurer Curtis Loftus over that $1.8 billion accounting error, boondoggle, however you want to describe it. They made that case in the Senate chamber, it was a hearing that we saw that one Monday. It was very fascinating to see play out because that is also something afforded in the state constitution that they can do to remove him if they think that he's not fulfilling his duties of his job. So, but we saw that play out in the Senate, and it was toward the end of the session, but we didn't see the House do anything with that. So any word from House leadership if they're just going to leave it hanging like that?
Yeah, so when the Senate passed it, it was with 3 weeks left in the session. It went over to the House. The House said, we have other issues that we want to get done. And it turned out that the calendar for at least this year was Curtis Loftus's biggest ally for keeping his job in 2025. And then yesterday, at the end of the session press conference, Merle Smith, the House Speaker, said, we have no appetite to take it up at all. So the resolution's probably just going to sit in Ways and Means, and nothing's going to happen with it unless we'll see what happens with the SEC investigation that's out there or the Inspector General investigation that's out there. But Merle Smith said it's going to be up to the voters on whether Curtis Loftus keeps his job after 2026. So we'll see if anyone else runs for the treasurer job.
Yeah. It makes it sound like they're going to try and get someone in that primary, too.
Yeah,
I mean, the way we hear from those lawmakers.
We need to know, that's the other question, like who will step up in the Republican primary to challenge Curtis Loftus, who has deep pockets and is willing to spend a lot of money to stay in that office, even though he said a few years ago he wasn't going to run.
Yeah.
He wants to protect his legacy, so he's back in the race. And I didn't think that treasurer's race would be a big, big race to be following in 2026. Maybe it will be.
Yeah, that's one more thing to watch. I know Weston Newton, the House Judiciary Committee chairman, asked us, what are you guys going to do in the off session? It's like, we got campaigns that like to heat up. Like, we're going to have plenty to do. Jeffrey, a big thing that is heating up, too, is energy reform. We're talking about that. That's been a big issue as well. We saw that die on the vine last session, 2024, came out swinging in 2025. But that bill got passed this past week as well, last week of session. What does that bill do? What is that going to mean for maybe the average electric consumer in the state?
You know, some of the consumer protections ended up getting stripped out at the end. So, or some of the things that the folks that follow consumers wanted out of it. So, but the key that it does, and probably the most important thing for South Carolina's future, is it allows Dominion Energy, you know, which is privately held, and the public Santee Cooper folks to join forces and build a 2,000 megawatt power plant in Colleton County. That's something that the utilities have said they need because, you know, South Carolina is running out of power as they continue to grow, data centers come around and everything. So, you know, the supporters said that was the key part of that bill. You know, there's also some things that got stripped out of it, talking about on the consumer side of things. There's some people wanted protections. So like if utilities need to come with eminent domain and take your land, that you get some more warning about that. That was taken out. There's also a program where the utilities can charge, instead of charging one big rate increase or one, relatively speaking, after 4 or 5 years, they can charge you each year a smaller amount, kind of like they do with your power bill. Like if, you know, you can pay a flat amount, but your power bill, and then eventually it settles out. Well, that would be what they want to do. Some people say that's just going to allow the utilities to just charge a bigger rate increase ultimately at the end, because they can do several smaller ones. And the House was fully back to this. You know, they supported it. They probably drove the train on this and everything. Senators, and again, citing my senior status here, senators still remember the whole VC Summer nuclear debacle, and they're nervous about Dominion getting together with Santee Cooper. They're nervous about some of these other little programs. They're nervous about ceding any more power, so to speak, to the utilities. So I think there will be a very watchful eye on all of this, but we'll just see how it shakes out.
And we're still waiting to see the future of VC Summer 2, something we never thought we'd be talking about back in 2017, that $9 billion boondoggle. But again, going back to the need for electricity and energy in the country and the state, we're talking about, you know, big data centers too that consume so much. It's almost like a chicken and egg situation too.
Well, and yes, and so, you know, the state's taking offers for someone to come and take over VC Summers, start the process again, you know, and build the thing. And so there's a lot of steps between here and there, so we'll have to see how all that shakes out. But just the fact that we're talking about it's pretty interesting. Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned data centers, and that's what's part of the key to this too. You know, the Senate wanted some sort of limits on data centers. Maybe they need to pay for more for their own power. Maybe they need to be limited in where they can, you know, build right now. The House didn't go for that, so it's not in the bill. That's another thing that's giving senators a little worry, too.
And that's really what's driving a lot of this demand for the energy, too.
Very much so. I mean, yes, South Carolina is growing fast, but those data centers take up, I mean, you're talking like the huge like Carolina Forest subdivisions amount of power used by a data center.
Yeah. Mayan, we have about 10 minutes left here. I want to ask you about another big topic, and that was lowering the state income tax. We saw a huge, big rollout, big, beautiful rollout of lawmakers, the governor, both House and Senate chambers, and everyone was talking about lowering the rates for income taxes, trying to get it really down lower to be more competitive with our neighbors. But that seemed to have fizzled out. What happened there, and was there anything that got salvaged from all that?
And I'm going to invoke my seniority and say I remember covering Tommy Pope's tax policy subcommittee this was actually kind of interesting. Obviously, so the House really wanted to go after the income tax, which provides about 44 to 45% of the revenue to the state general fund, which is a pretty big deal. And they came out with a pretty big plan, which would have dropped the top rate down to that 3.99%. They wanted to create a flat tax, the argument being so many people in South Carolina, so many filers are not paying any income tax, and it's unfair to everyone at every single socioeconomic level. They wanted to flatten it, make it more fair. But what it turned out was that state estimates said that would probably raise taxes on nearly 60% of filers. And as you can imagine, as we all saw from so many lawmakers across political aisles, that was just not going to happen. And the criticism was so loud, so powerful and aggressive that the House Ways and Means Committee really went back to the drawing board to figure out, all right, what is a way that we can achieve our goal to make it flat, to make it more fair, but also do it in a way where we're not increasing taxes for people in South Carolina who are truly just really struggling right now with both inflation and other, federal costs and state costs. And so they go back to the drawing board, and what they ultimately decided to do is to create this progressive, flat, then zero tax. It's kind of interesting. So by lowering the top rate down to that 5.39%, so if you have an income of $30,000 or more, you would pay that top rate. Filers with taxable income less than $30,000, you would pay that 1.99%. And then eventually, if income revenues are still pretty solid, it would get down to zero. The argument being that, they all want to eliminate the income tax altogether, but if you do it too fast, that means you really have to cut the budget. And as we all know, again, as I mentioned, the income tax revenue is about 45% of the state general fund. Most general fund money pays for healthcare costs and K through 12 education costs. So when you're talking about completely eliminating that huge pot of money, you're talking about deep budget cuts, and you have to figure out which pot do you want to pull that from. So the House passed this new bill in the last week of session, very late at night, and now it'll be the Senate's turn. And as Joe likes to remind us all the time, and Senator Harvey Peeler, he's never seen a tax cut that he can't find a way to go even lower. So we do definitely expect the Senate, if they do take this up next year, as Senator Peeler has indicated, that it will be lower. But it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if they do get down to zero, which I'm not entirely sure. I don't think anyone's been able to give us a projection of how long that would take.
It may take a minute.
Yeah.
A Senate minute.
Yeah. And so, right, a Senate minute. So what does that look like for the other revenues? And I think Ways and Means Chair Bruce Bannister has kind of been clear that they probably need to start looking at, sales tax, among others, if they're going to completely eliminate this huge pot of money for them.
Yeah, and again, this is the first year of the 2-year session, so bills that didn't move this year are still alive, and we'll revisit them in January, like that tax plan we're talking about. But Mary, one big bill that did get through was another education bill, and that's the Educator Assistance Act. It's kind of wonky, but it's supposed to really help teachers with retention and recruitment. Tell us about that. What's in that?
This was the key priority this year for our educator assistance groups across the state, and it is essentially the baby legislation of House Education and Public Works Chair Shannon Erickson. She has been wanting to get this to the governor's desk for years. It kept getting hung up in the Senate, but finally just this week did get to the governor's desk. He signed it into law, and it will go into effect, some parts of it this July, other parts of it next July, but it's a big win for teachers. Essentially, to give some background on how this whole process works in South Carolina, public school teachers sign their contracts in mid-May. But as opposed to pretty much every other profession, they have no idea when they sign their contracts how much they'll make, where they'll be working, specifically at what school, even the subject matter they'll be teaching. And that can be reassigned during the school year. So they might, which we saw in Richland County the other year, that teachers are reassigned in the middle of the school year from one school to the other, and there's nothing they can do about it. If teachers break their contracts, they could see their license suspended for a year, which is obviously a huge issue to try to find another teaching job. So what this does is it reduces a lot of the burdensome paperwork that they were saying was really bogging them down to help with that recruitment and retention, but it also reforms the contract process. So essentially, when teachers are still signing their contracts in mid-May, districts don't know how much their budgets will be because, as has been mentioned, the state budget's not finalized, and that's a huge portion of their funding. But when teachers would sign their contracts going forward, it would have a general estimate of here's how much you'll be making. It is subject to change, but they have at least an idea. And then it also would require that districts give teachers notification at least 14 days before the school year begins on what their assignment is as far as the school where they'll be working, the subject they'll be teaching. So they have that going into it, and it makes the process a little tougher for them to get reassigned in the middle of the school year.
And just a little bit more trust in teachers. We have less than 5 minutes, Mary. I want to stick with you for another bill, big one that was S2, was dealing with restructuring some of our healthcare agencies in the state. This bill died last year over some contentious political happenings. Those were put aside this year for different reasons. But tell us about S2 and what agencies are being consolidated and restructured and what some folks might be seeing out there.
Well, it's definitely a massive restructuring of state agencies that has really kind of slid under the radar. But again, signed into law by the governor a few weeks ago. It's in effect now. It essentially combines 3 existing state agencies into one. It's called the new Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. I'm still getting the hang of what this new department is. But it combines the Departments of Mental Health, the Department of Disability and Special Needs, and Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse Services, DAODIS. These are agencies that have a lot of crossover between the folks they're serving, but had been really serving folks in silos and not communicating with each other to best serve South Carolinians. A study a few years ago found the state has the most fractured healthcare delivery system in the entire country. Several agencies doing the work that in other states just one department is doing. The other big thing is that under this new agency, the director would be appointed by the governor to essentially give a little bit more control. If it's heading in a direction that folks don't like, the governor obviously is elected. And if they'll let the governor know if they don't feel that this person is doing a good job.
That oversight there too. Joe, I want to go to you about a bill that I think a lot of folks need to know about, will know about when they get pulled over. If they're holding their cell phone while driving, we passed that, no texting and driving law a couple years ago, but that was never really easy to enforce because if a cop showed up and you're like, well, I wasn't texting, but you were holding your phone, now that's being phased in now too to get rid of people from being distracted while driving. So hopefully also lowering some insurance rates too.
Yeah, so basically it says, don't hold your phone while driving.
Stop
doing it. Get a bracket. I have a bracket in my car for my phone. It will go into, if it's signed by the governor, which it probably will be, it'll go into effect September 1st. And then there's 6 months worth of warnings that you'll get to put your phone down. And then the first fine is $100 and the second fine is $200 or $250 or $200. My favorite thing about this bill, it says you can't look at motion pictures or moving pictures, so please stop doing your Zoom calls while driving.
Watching a video while driving.
Probably shouldn't have been doing that in the first place.
Jeffrey, we have less than 2 minutes left. I want to ask you just about overall the vibe of the session when we talk about the House specifically. We've seen some infighting, some differences of opinions, but how would you sum up the session thus far, especially when we look at House Speaker Merle Smith and what he has to deal with all those members in that chamber?
The composition of the House didn't change that much as far as the groups go. I mean, there's the same amount of Freedom Caucus people, same amount of Republicans, same amount of Democrats. So there was a similar vibe to last year. But it just seems like things get a little more testy as time goes on because everybody finds their points. And kind of like an old married couple, their annoyances just get bigger and bigger because they're always there. And so, I mean, they did, Merle Smith, Speaker, would tell you that they did accomplish some things. They did pass some bills, but in part because the Republican majority outside of the Freedom Caucus is large enough, they can still do whatever they want. So it'll be interesting to see as long as this keeps going. I mean, it's a different vibe in the House than it was under Jay Lucas when they were still dealing with Bobby Harrell's, being indicted and things like that. It was a happier time. Now, they're at the point where I think everybody's just kind of, there's a power vacuum and not a vacuum, but a struggle. Sure. So yeah, it's a different vibe.
But also still, I mean, a pretty successful year, I would say, in some of these major wins for the caucus, for sure.
The caucus will show you, they showed us a sheet of paper yesterday with a bunch of green checks because they feel like they accomplished what they were looking to do.
Things that they can use when they run for re-election next year. Yeah. We'll see how that plays out. Well, that's all the time we have. What?
Something else? 2026.
Re-election. You can find that entire episode on youtube.com/South Carolina ETV. And I want to say thank you to our folks who joined us on set, Jeffrey Collins with the Associated Press, Mary Green with WIS-TV, Mayan Schechter with South Carolina Public Radio, and Joe Bustos with the state newspaper. Thanks, guys. We'll see you, in January, but also on the campaign trail. Welcome to the wind down section, our little break from the news. We're glad you're here, along with A.T. Shire, lead podcast producer. A.T., welcome to the wind down section.
Thank you so much for having me. I gotta say, living in a world with a new pope, and the idea that because he went to Villanova, the idea that the pope has been in a Wawa It's very strange
Makes
to
him
me.
human.
It's made very weird to me. I don't know if that should be disqualifying
I still
or not.
don't really feel like, I know he's American. I get that, but like, I just don't feel like he's an American.
Yeah, I
Can I
agree.
say that?
I mean,
Can I not say that? He's a man of the Americas, you know what I mean? Like, he's served all over, but yes, of course he's from here. He's one of us, so that's exciting for us to see that. I would not have expected.
Very strange.
It is
Very
weird
weird
times. Yeah,
Weird times.
I broke the news to House Speaker Merle Smith the other day.
Good for you. Yeah.
I said he was coming out of the Senate chamber. They had just ratified acts, and he's in his purple robe, and I'm like, and we were all pretending to be like paparazzi and stuff on the camera. I'm like, what do you think of the new pope? And he's like, new pope? What are you talking about? I'm like, the American? And he's like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Very strange.
I'm just finding out about this. You're saying this is happening now?
The name, the first I'm hearing of it, the name American
Leo.
Pope sounds, is that a show? Was that a show? It sounds like a show.
It was something like the new pope.
Okay, American
New girl.
Pope.
I think it was called New Girl.
Yeah, they should know. Okay, Gavin, anyway, we got a call.
Gilmore Girls?
Even with a new pope, we still get calls,
Well,
okay?
you know, it's interesting times.
And it's someone who knows you. So,
What?
Yep, I'm just going to leave it at that and let it speak for
That
itself.
can mean a lot of things.
There
A
we
lot of
go.
things.
Hey, Gavin, it's Sowards down here in Mount Pleasant. Just wanted to call. I've been meaning to call for a while and say you guys are doing a great job. But I was listening the other day when you were talking about failing astronomy in college. And at first it made me laugh. I can't believe how you fail astronomy. I got to be in that class. I don't know if you had the same guy. He looked like the offspring of Michael J. Fox and Conan O'Brien. And he was a pretty good teacher. I did fall asleep all the time in that class. So in my head, I was kind of, making fun of you a little bit. But then I remembered that my final semester in front of the entire college newsroom, the advisor was on the phone with my intro level Latin teacher or something and said over the phone, I'm not going to let her fail. So the last semester of my college career, I very nearly didn't graduate because I was almost failing an intro level class, and the entire student newspaper got to hear about it. So maybe I shouldn't be so quick to judge your astronomy failings. I'm glad you passed in the end, but you guys are doing a great job. Keep it up. You're where I get all my South Carolina news, and have a good rest of your day.
And Gavin, that's not it. She also did a little addendum right here.
Hey, it's Sowards again. And I totally forgot to say that back in the day, you definitely made fun of all of those broadcast journalism students. And I just think it's a little funny now that you're very much broadcast from and no more print. But nobody's really in print journalism anymore anyway. So that's it. Also, your message is still the coronavirus message. So another reminder, you might want to update that.
Amanda, that's my good friend Amanda Sowards. We both went to Kent State together. We worked at the student newspaper together, Daily Kent Stater, back when it was daily. Now it's not, I don't think it's a newspaper anymore, but we were both photo editors, photographers at the time.
Yeah.
So we had a great time. But yes, we had a converged newsroom. That was the term at the time with the TV2 kids. And they were all typical the TV kids, we will. And we would make fun of them. But it was funny because my last semester, my senior year, you could either take print beat reporting, which is what the print reporters did, or you could do broadcast reporting.
Yeah.
And since I was a visual journalism major, I was like, well, I can't write. So I can't tell the stars and I can't write.
Can't read the stars, can't write.
So I did broadcast beat instead. So we have some classic video of Gavin with long hair doing some stand-ups that we can resurrect. But she's true with that because I was always a print kid. I was in newspapers until I got to ETV. The exception I will say here, though, is that we are not commercial television. We are public broadcasting, and it's a different speed. It's not me being... hey, well, it's Mugga, the 5 o'clock
I
news.
wish. I mean, I'm pushing,
We're not too far
for it
away.
constantly. I'm pushing for it constantly.
Well, it's just more of a civil dialogue here,
I mean,
but yes.
that's just the way I like to hear my news on the 5s.
Well, here are the 105.5 The Wave.
Get pitted on the wave.
Here's some more Billy Ocean coming at you.
Nautical only.
We're going to do a whole podcast and just drive time
I would
voices.
love that. I personally would like that.
It takes so much energy, I think. But how funny for Amanda to say that story. That was really cute of heard her say.
Thank you, Amanda, for calling in. I also
it's like the true college PTSD dream that you think of, and it's like that one class that you forgot about or were failing, and all of a sudden it's like hanging over your head.
See, I just went the other way and took the easiest possible classes.
There you go.
Okay, one of which was astronomy, but also I just took 3 different guitar graded classes in one semester. So all I had to do was play guitar, and I was gonna be okay.
I took hula dancing one semester.
Good for you. We didn't get that kind of stuff in my small college, but like,
I got a B+, only because the quizzes were on like the Hawaiian language. I was not
mahalo, brother.
It was me and a bunch of girls. I was like, okay, I'm gonna wear my bathing suit to class because that's what we're gonna dance in.
I do, Amanda Sowards, I'm very happy too. The little bit of shade you're like, Gavin, how did you feel that? I slept through the whole thing and got the B. I do like that.
I'm telling you, I can't grasp the stars. I need Earth sciences.
You the ocean.
You
read the ocean like no problem. You don't even look up.
The tide's out right now. You know,
dude, the tide's out.
I can tell you what the tides are doing right now.
Okay, yeah, I know. You can feel it in your bones because you're 70% water and the moon. Okay,
I'm always being pulled.
Yeah, you're being pulled this way and that. Neap tide, you know.
King tide.
Anyway,
I think it's a king tide today. You know it is.
Yeah, California. Anyway, Gavin, I think that's it.
Happy
Please
Signing
call.
Day, folks. Give us a call like Amanda did. That was really sweet of her. 803-563-7169. That is our number. Again, we are not going to change the greeting. We've had a council meeting. It's been determined that we cannot change. We don't know the password.
Your complaints have been noted. Okay, they're on record. They have been noted. I think it has to stay. Cool Cats
and if you haven't heard it, great time to call 803-563-7169. And if you make it past the greeting, leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us about some of the classes, some of the difficulties in your academic career. We'd love to hear about that. Some words of advice for the class of 2025, perhaps. Stay up to date with the latest news as well at scetv.org and southcarolinapublicradio.org. And don't forget to support your local newspapers. The South Carolina Lede is a production of South Carolina Public Radio. Our producer is A.T. Shire. Amy Crouch is our supervising producer. Sean Birch is our executive producer. This podcast is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. For the South Carolina Lede, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina. So no, we are not going to forget. No.
We'll forgive. We will not forget.
No, well,
I may not forgive.
I don't even know I'm going to forgive.
I don't even forgive you.
Look what you're making me say. I'm not going to forgive.